Imagine you're standing in front of a massive toolbox filled with instruments designed to improve your mental health, emotional regulation, and cognitive performance. Someone tells you that to use these tools, you must first believe in reincarnation, karma, and various metaphysical claims about the nature of reality. You'd probably walk away, frustrated that practical solutions are locked behind belief systems you can't accept. This is exactly how many skeptics, scientists, and rationalists feel about Buddhism. They see meditation practices gaining scientific credibility, but assume the entire package requires adopting religious beliefs they find unverifiable. Here's what most people don't understand. The most powerful practices within Tibetan Buddhism function as mental training technologies that work regardless of what you believe. They're not prayers or rituals requiring faith. They're systematic methods for investigating your direct experience and training specific cognitive capacities. Methods that produce measurable results whether you believe in Buddhist cosmology or not. If you're a skeptic who wants the benefits of contemplative practice without adopting metaphysical beliefs you can't verify, subscribe now and activate notifications. You're about to discover 4 Buddhist practices that work purely through applied attention and direct observation, practices validated by neuroscience that transform your mind through training rather than faith. Before we continue, we want to be completely transparent with you. This video is produced with the assistance of artificial intelligence for narration and visual generation. However, every piece of research, every explanation of Buddhist practices, every distinction between what requires belief and what functions as direct training, all of this comes from 100% human curation, investigation, and intellectual work. We believe in combining the efficiency of technology with the irreplaceable depth of human scholarship to bring you the most accurate and meaningful content about Tibetan Buddhism. Let's address the elephant in the room immediately. Traditional Tibetan Buddhism includes many metaphysical claims: rebirth across multiple lifetimes, karma as a moral law governing the universe, realms of existence populated by hungry ghosts and hell beings, enlightened beings who can appear in dreams and transfer consciousness. For a skeptic approaching this tradition, these claims present an immediate barrier. You can't verify them through direct observation or scientific testing. You either accept them on faith or you don't, and if you're constitutionally unable to accept claims without evidence, you might assume the entire Buddhist tradition is inaccessible to you. But here's the crucial distinction that changes everything. Buddhism, particularly in its Tibetan form, contains 2 distinct categories of teachings. The first category includes metaphysical frameworks, cosmological models, and claims about the ultimate nature of reality that extend beyond direct experience. These require some degree of faith or at minimum suspension of disbelief. The second category consists of phenomenological instructions, direct investigation protocols, and attention training techniques that produce results you can verify immediately through your own experience. These don't require any belief whatsoever. They're empirical in the original sense of that word, based on direct observation and repeatable experience. The historical Buddha himself emphasized this distinction. In the Kalama Sutta, he instructed his followers not to accept teachings based on tradition, scripture, speculation, or authority, but only after direct observation confirms that specific practices reduce suffering and increase well-being. He said, "When you know for yourselves that these qualities are skillful, blameless, praised by the wise, and when adopted and carried out lead to welfare and happiness, then you should enter and remain in them." This is an empirical standard. Test the practices. Observe the results in your direct experience. Keep what works. This approach is exactly what appeals to modern skeptics who value evidence over belief. The 4 practices I'm about to share with you operate entirely within this empirical framework. They make no demands on your belief system. They simply invite you to try specific mental exercises and observe what happens in your direct experience. If this empirical approach to Buddhist practice resonates with you, take a moment to like this video. Your engagement helps us reach other skeptics who assume Buddhism requires abandoning rationality or accepting unprovable claims. Practice 1 is focused attention meditation, called Shamatha in the Tibetan tradition. This is perhaps the most straightforward and scientifically validated practice in the entire Buddhist repertoire. The instruction is simple. Choose an object of attention, traditionally the breath, and rest your awareness on that object. When your attention wanders, which it will constantly gently bring it back to the chosen object. That's it. No belief required, no metaphysics involved. Just the systematic training of a specific cognitive capacity, the ability to sustain voluntary attention on a chosen object. You can verify immediately whether your attention actually stays on the breath or wanders into thought. You can observe whether bringing attention back becomes easier with practice. You can notice whether your mind feels more settled after 20 minutes of this exercise. All of this is direct, empirical observation. The neuroscience validating this practice is extensive. A 2025 study published in Frontiers in Psychology examined how Buddhist meditation, specifically Shamatha or focused attention practice, transforms consciousness beyond conventional mindfulness. The research shows that Shamatha systematically cultivates metacognitive insight, the ability to observe your own mental processes. It strengthens attentional control by training the brain networks responsible for sustaining focus and detecting mind wandering. Studies using neuroimaging demonstrate that focused attention meditation increases activity in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and anterior cingulate cortex, regions critical for attention regulation. Long-term practitioners show increased gray matter density in these regions and enhanced connectivity between attention networks. Research by Richie Davidson and others reveals that even 8 weeks of daily practice produces measurable improvements in sustained attention, working memory capacity, and the ability to filter out distractions. None of these effects require believing in karma or rebirth. They result from systematic training of attention networks through repeated practice. But here's where skeptics need to be careful. The mindfulness industry has overpromised and underdelivered in ways that rightfully make scientists and rationalists suspicious. A 2014 review of 47 meditation trials, including over 3,500 participants, found essentially no evidence for benefits related to substance abuse, sleep, or weight control. A 2024 Scientific American article highlighted that many mindfulness studies are poorly designed, lacking control groups and often showing unimpressive results when properly controlled. Less than 25% of meditation trials monitor for potential negative effects. The authors of a major review in Perspectives on Psychological Science warned that scientific rigor isn't there yet to make the big claims being marketed about mindfulness. This critique is valid and important, but it doesn't invalidate focused attention meditation as a training method. It invalidates the hype, the overselling, the claims that 20 minutes of meditation will cure everything from anxiety to cancer. The actual verifiable benefit of Shamatha practice is more modest, but real. It trains your capacity to sustain voluntary attention. That capacity then allows you to work more effectively with habitual mental patterns, because you can actually observe them rather than being lost in them. You're not eliminating negative emotions or achieving blissful states. You're developing the meta-awareness to see your mental processes as processes rather than as reality itself. Share this video with skeptical friends who dismiss all meditation as wishful thinking or pseudoscience. The practice of focused attention is as empirical as physical exercise. You do specific mental actions repeatedly and observe specific results in your cognitive functioning. Practice 2 is loving kindness meditation, called Metta in Pali or Maitri in Tibetan. This practice sounds touchy-feely and therefore immediately suspicious to many skeptics. How can deliberately wishing people well possibly do anything meaningful? Isn't it just positive thinking wrapped in spiritual language? But here's what loving kindness practice actually involves. You systematically direct attention to the felt sense of goodwill, friendliness, and care, first toward yourself, then toward others. The traditional instruction uses phrases like, may I be happy, may I be healthy, may I be safe, may I live with ease. Then you extend the same phrases toward a friend, a neutral person, a difficult person, and eventually all beings. But the phrases aren't magic spells. They're attention directors, cues that help you locate and sustain the specific emotional quality of goodwill in your felt experience. You're training a particular emotional capacity, the same way focused attention trains attentional capacity. No belief required. just the systematic cultivation of a specific mental quality through directed attention. The neuroscience on loving-kindness meditation is surprisingly robust. Research published in multiple journals demonstrates that even brief loving-kindness practice produces measurable changes in brain regions associated with empathy and emotional regulation. A study from Emory University showed that just 8 weeks of compassion meditation increased activity in neural networks for empathy and perspective-taking. Research on experienced practitioners reveals increased activation in the insula and temporal parietal junction during loving-kindness meditation, regions critical for emotional processing and understanding others' mental states. Studies show decreased amygdala reactivity to negative stimuli after compassion training, meaning practitioners show less automatic fear and aversion responses. Research on heart rate variability, a measure of autonomic nervous system flexibility, consistently shows improvements in people practicing loving-kindness meditation. Higher heart rate variability correlates with better emotional regulation and lower anxiety. Perhaps most interestingly, a study published in Psychological Science found that 7 weeks of loving-kindness practice increased participants' positive emotions day to day, which in turn built personal resources including increased mindfulness, sense of purpose, social support, and decreased illness symptoms. These effects occurred through a measurable psychological mechanism called the broaden and build effect, where positive emotions expand your attention and build lasting personal resources. None of this requires believing in metaphysical claims. It's training a specific cognitive emotional capacity through systematic practice. The skeptical objection here is usually, "But I don't feel anything when I try this practice. I say the phrases and nothing happens." This is actually evidence the practice is working. You're discovering through direct observation that you can't just decide to feel compassion and have it appear. The feeling is not under direct voluntary control. What is under voluntary control is where you place attention and how you relate to whatever arises. Loving-kindness practice trains you to notice even subtle feelings of friendliness or care, to sustain attention on those feelings when they arise, and to notice what conditions allow them to strengthen or what causes them to collapse. Over time, with repeated practice, the capacity to generate and sustain these emotional qualities becomes stronger and more accessible. You're literally building neural pathways through repeated activation. This is as empirical as strength training builds muscle through repeated stress and recovery. If you haven't subscribed yet, click now to join a community of skeptics and rationalists exploring these practices without abandoning critical thinking or empirical standards. Practice 3 is analytical meditation or investigation of direct experience. This might be the most compatible practice for skeptics because it's essentially systematic phenomenology, the careful observation and analysis of your moment-to-moment experience. Unlike focused attention, which sustains awareness on a single object, analytical meditation uses thinking and investigation deliberately to examine the nature of experience itself. The traditional form investigates questions like, where is the self located? When you search for it in direct experience, can you find a solid, unchanging self? Or do you find only a stream of changing sensations, perceptions, thoughts, and feelings with no central core? You're not accepting an answer on faith. You're investigating your actual experience systematically. Another form of analytical meditation examines impermanence. Is there anything in your direct experience that's not changing from moment to moment? Your breath changes, sensations arise and dissolve. Thoughts appear and disappear. Emotions intensify and fade. Even the sense of being a continuous self is constructed moment by moment from memory and narrative, rather than being a directly perceived continuous entity. You can verify all of this through careful attention to your direct experience. No belief required. Another investigation examines the relationship between mental states and happiness. When your mind is consumed by craving for something you don't have, how does that feel? When you're lost in aversion, resisting what's present in your experience, what's that like? When your mind is relatively settled and clear, not grasping or pushing away, how does that compare? You're conducting experiments on your own consciousness, gathering data through direct observation. This is the essence of the phenomenological method in philosophy and the introspective tradition in psychology. Buddhism developed these investigation methods 2,500 years ago. Modern neuroscience is beginning to validate what these investigations reveal. The sense of self that feels so solid and continuous is actually constructed by narrative processes in the left hemisphere of the brain. Research on split-brain patients and studies of self-referential processing show that the self is distributed across multiple brain networks rather than located in any single place. Studies on impermanence align with findings in neuroscience that all mental states, including perception, are constantly constructed and reconstructed by brain processes rather than being stable representations of reality. Research on emotion regulation demonstrates that much of our suffering comes from what Buddhists call the second arrow, our resistance to and elaboration of primary experiences rather than the experiences themselves. All of this can be observed directly without accepting metaphysical frameworks. The practice is to look carefully at your actual experience and see what's actually there rather than what you assume is there based on habit and conceptual overlay. The skeptical strength here is that you're not asked to believe anything. You're asked to look and see for yourself. If you investigate and find a solid, unchanging self in your direct experience, that's your data. If you investigate and find only process and change with no stable core, that's your data. The practice doesn't require accepting conclusions, but rather training the capacity to investigate carefully and see clearly. Practice 4 is body awareness or somatic meditation. This practice involves systematically moving attention through the body, noticing physical sensations without interpretation or judgment. You might scan from head to feet, noticing temperature, pressure, tingling, tension, relaxation, pain, pleasure, or neutral sensations in each area. The instruction is simply to notice what's actually present in your direct sensory experience, rather than thinking about the body or visualizing it. This develops what's called interoceptive awareness, the capacity to accurately perceive internal bodily states. Research shows that most people have surprisingly poor interoceptive awareness, often missing or misinterpreting signals from their bodies. The neuroscience on body awareness practices is compelling. Studies show that systematic body scan meditation increases gray matter in the insula, the brain region critical for interoceptive awareness and emotional processing. Research demonstrates that body awareness training improves emotion regulation because emotions are fundamentally embodied. When you can accurately perceive the physical components of emotional states, breathing changes, heart rate shifts, muscle tension patterns, facial expressions, you gain earlier warning of emotional escalation and more options for intervention. Studies on chronic pain show that body awareness practices can significantly reduce suffering, not by eliminating pain signals, but by changing the relationship to those signals. When you can observe pain sensations with curiosity rather than resistance, the suffering component often decreases even when the physical sensation remains. Research on trauma demonstrates that body awareness is critical for recovery because traumatic experiences are often stored in bodily sensations and implicit memory rather than explicit narrative memory. By developing capacity to stay present with difficult bodily sensations without dissociating or being overwhelmed, people process and integrate traumatic material more effectively. None of this requires metaphysical belief. It's training specific capacities through systematic practice. You can verify immediately whether you can actually feel sensations in your left foot or whether attention is lost in thought about the foot. You can observe whether physical tension decreases when you bring non-judgmental awareness to it. You can notice whether emotional reactivity changes when you can perceive the embodied components of emotions clearly, all empirical, all verifiable through direct observation. The beauty of approaching these 4 practices as a skeptic is that you have no investment in particular outcomes. You're not trying to achieve enlightenment or become a good Buddhist. You're simply conducting experiments with your own consciousness, training specific capacities and observing results. This actually puts you in a stronger position than practitioners who have strong beliefs about what should happen, because you're less likely to interpret your experience through conceptual filters. What you'll likely discover if you practice consistently is this. Focused attention training gives you meta-awareness, the capacity to observe your mental processes rather than being lost in them. Loving kindness practice develops your capacity for positive emotions and relational warmth, which has measurable effects on well-being and social connection. Analytical meditation reveals that many things you assumed were solid and permanent in your experience are actually constructed, changing, and subject to investigation. Body awareness connects you to the physical dimension of emotional life and provides an anchor in direct sensation rather than narrative and interpretation. These are practical cognitive and emotional capacities, not mystical attainments. They improve your ability to work with your own mind effectively. They give you more degrees of freedom in how you respond to circumstances rather than being entirely at the mercy of conditioned patterns. The traditional Tibetan Buddhist framework would say, these practices are preliminary training that prepares you for deeper insights into the nature of mind and reality. A skeptic can simply say these are valuable mental training techniques that produce measurable benefits in attention, emotional regulation, interoceptive awareness, and metacognitive capacity. Both statements can be true. You don't need to accept the metaphysical framework to benefit from the practices. You might eventually find, after years of practice and direct observation, that some of the metaphysical claims start making more sense based on your experience. Or you might not. Either way, you've developed valuable capacities that serve you regardless of what you believe about karma and rebirth. This is why these 4 practices are perfect for skeptics. They don't require you to abandon your commitment to evidence and direct observation. They actually strengthen that commitment by training you to observe your experience more carefully, more precisely, and with less conceptual distortion. The scientific validation for these practices isn't perfect. There's been overhype and poor methodology in some meditation research. But the core effects are real and replicable when practices are done consistently and correctly. Focused attention improves attentional control. Compassion practice increases positive emotions and prosocial behavior. Analytical meditation develops metacognitive insight. Body awareness enhances interoceptive accuracy. These are modest, verifiable claims supported by increasingly rigorous research. What part of this empirical approach to Buddhist practice appeals to you? Are there still aspects you find difficult to accept without metaphysical commitments? Share your thoughts and skeptical questions in the comments. One final point for skeptics. Buddhism at its core is not about believing the right things. It's about training your mind to see clearly and respond skillfully. The Buddha compared his teachings to a raft for crossing a river, useful for the journey but not something to carry once you've reached the other shore. The practices are tools, not objects of worship. Use them if they work. Modify them if needed. Discard them if they don't serve you. This pragmatic, empirical approach is exactly what makes these practices accessible to skeptics. You're not being asked to convert to a religion. You're being offered training methods refined over thousands of years for developing specific cognitive capacities. Try them with the same empirical rigor you'd apply to any other training program. Observe the results in your direct experience. Keep what works. Question everything else. Thank you for exploring this skeptic-friendly approach to Buddhist practice with us. May these 4 practices serve your journey toward greater clarity, emotional balance, and skillful responsiveness regardless of what you ultimately come to believe about the nature of reality. Share this with any skeptics or rationalists in your life who've been curious about meditation, but turned off by metaphysical claims. Share it with scientists and researchers who want to understand what's actually valuable in contemplative traditions once you strip away the religious packaging. Share it with anyone who values direct observation over inherited belief. Anyone ready to investigate their own consciousness with the same rigor they'd bring to any empirical investigation. These 4 practices offer a doorway into contemplative training that requires no leap of faith, only willingness to look carefully at your own experience and see what you actually find there.